Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick, and I'm at the Adoration Chapel at St. Isidore. It's a church, a parish near me, and one of my coaches, spiritual healers, invited me to come over, and I forgot how, just like my video on acupuncture, I forgot how good that concept was as far as healing. Spirituality is a difficult concept to bring up in a medical office because I think that society is somewhat hesitant. Not all. I have some very devout worshipers here, especially on Sunday at 1 o'clock. Huge Filipino community. So it's still somewhat taboo. When I have found, I bring it up in the office, usually when I take an integrative medicine history to best figure out who's in the room with me and how I can help them. It includes exercise, work, sleep hours, nutrition, and spirituality. But when the question comes up, do you have a spiritual practice? I used to ask it that way. Usually the conversation will come to an abrupt halt, and I have to define what spirituality means. So I recently changed that question to, do you have any mindful practice? I think it was a little more, it was an easier impact question. So I grew up as a Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school all my life, and this resonates with me, but in the recent 10 years, I still go to church on Sunday, and my son actually is very driven to make us go to church. So there's a healer in him, daughter and wife the same way, but sometimes, unfortunately, I rationalize to deprioritize the need to go to my grounding, and that's what I wanted to talk about. There is value in spirituality. It doesn't have to be religion, but in fact there might be true definitions that separate the two, but they're both surround the need to belong. I think that as you talk to an elder, whether it's a grandpop or elder in a ministry setting, it's always comforting. It's always a sign of authority. Just the name grandpop, or in Tagalog, it's called lolo, Spanish abuelo, papap. There's always, you can conjure up ideas of somebody that was your grandfather. But then even in society, if you think grandpop, grandfather, grandmother, there's always a sense of respect in most people. And whether they had a grandmother, grandfather, or whether they are a grandmother, grandfather, I think there's a cherished sense of belonging. And that same sense of belonging is what spirit is. In fact, spirit has the same root word as inspire, breath, universal. So you can define it any way you want, but I think that we always have to have some form of belonging. And this is mine, but it's important, if you don't have yours, to find your what it used to mean to you, and then try to embrace it. Because if we just do it the physical and the nutritional, probably not going to be short-sighted. Probably going to be short-sighted if you include this as part of the healing process. I think you'll get there faster. So I'll put links down below for what I've done in the past with spirituality and mindfulness, but try to tap into your old source. Sorry. I just wanted to say I had to stop the filming because two other parishioners came in, and I did not want to interrupt their worship. And no matter which definition of spirituality that resonates with you,
And you don't have to be Catholic. You can be Hebrew, you can be Muslim. There's always a sense of belonging there. If you look at Dan Buettner's work on finding a blue zone throughout the world, one of the concepts, because for a blue zone to exist, you have to have a large population of people hitting the 103. I'm going to step in here. Hitting 103 years of age, and that has a lot to. That's powerful. If you have a society or a culture or a community that is hitting an age that usually doesn't happen, especially in the United States, I think that the objective would be to learn from those folks, that culture, that the city, and try to practice what they do. And one of the concepts in the blue zones, in all the blue zones, is a sense of belonging. And I talked about inspire, the root word, inspiration, spirit. The sense of belonging for a grandparent, again, I'm going back to the elder, is important to embrace. I think that when one of the things that I see is when somebody gets older, they become detached from youth. Especially look at our nursing homes or our SNFs, skilled nursing facilities in the hospital. It's very depressing, number one, to be in a hospital, number two, to not have family around or loved ones. So if you've ever lost a loved one, watch, especially if they're in hospice, watch the effect on the face expression on that loved one when the little ones come in, when the children come in to the hospital room. My father did the same thing on his deathbed. He had a massive stroke, and he wasn't supposed to live, but he chose. I thought I helped him live, but it wasn't me, and wasn't the procedures that my colleagues in California did. It was him. But as soon as he started to come out of the stroke, to a certain degree, but which was unbelievable with the amount of blood that was in his brain. But when the youth would come in, his nieces, nephews, my siblings, his sister, he would brighten up. I noticed that especially when I had to help him with his wishes and he just wasn't improving. He's going downhill. I had to pull the plug, but a friend of his came in, Joe, Uncle Joe, and you could see his eyes still light up. And technically he was somewhat of a vegetable, but how did he respond? And I know people will say, oh, it was just somebody out there that's watching will probably say it was concrete. Concrete says that he just had some neurological firing impulse and happened to coincide with Joe coming to the bedside and his eyes opened because it was just instinctive. I don't believe that. So whether you believe it or not, that's the way I chose to do it, and it makes me feel good. So the other thing that also helps with spirit, or touching spirit again, is that it brings back a sense of youth. For me, it does. I remember going to the church, my dad bringing me to church. I love my father, and I love my mom too, but a lot of great memories are around that. I remember in high school, I was pretty good with track and field. I made team captain and most valuable player. I always wanted to race against, I wanted to race against the best, but I would always start off my races, my runs, my jumps as a sprinter and a long jumper, or with 3 Hail Marys. And I remember carrying this. This is a statue my mother gave to me from Prague. And I would put it in this, I told Pat this yesterday, my spiritual advisor. I put it in this red sash, and I'd pin it to my, sorry, but I pin it to my jock strap on the backside of my pants, my running shorts. And I'd always just go back. It probably looked like I was picking my butt, but I always go back there and feel the statue the token, if you want to call it a token, and I would say 3 Hail Marys, either before I jumped or before I sprinted as I was going down through the blocks, or for a big event. Even after that, I relied on it for sports, but then before taking my SATs, before taking my boards, before taking having a prayer about my kids before they were born, I'd always go back to 3 Hail Marys. I still do. In the Adoration Chapel that I just showed you, I did the same thing before I would start filming, but I felt compelled to show you what spirituality was or is to me, because I think we're lacking it. And whether you have a physical thing that reminds you of your spirituality, or you have a memory that takes you back into practicing or embracing your spirit, getting grounded, becoming a part or realizing you're a part of something bigger, I think that it's important, just because it gives us hope. When the one thing with being in nature, or when I go on hikes, solitude is nice for reflection, but sometimes it can, especially with sorrow, bring up loneliness. And if you've ever been lonely or depressed before, or have seasonal affective disorder, number one, you should really see a counselor. You should see a psychologist, or get help. But I think that it drives emotion, mood, and the will to change down. So sometimes that can set you up for not eating, not wanting to make a change, not wanting to invest. And when that happens, I think that the human body and its immune system will start to show effects. So the concept of breaking your spirit, as in prison camps in World War II and Vietnam and Germany, when prisoners were interrogated, sometimes they would have very strong spirits, and it would be tough to get the information out of them. But techniques of interview have evolved, sometimes bad, sometimes good, but to get desired information from a prisoner, you can do this safely. I do believe that this has been studied over and over again with the FBI, law enforcement. But there are ways to break the spirit of individual that's incarcerated or holding information, so that they will divulge information. And that's usually by lack of sleep, constant questioning, decreased food, a little bit of dehydration. All those things, in that sense, do bring out surrender. And sometimes that's good for police force, law enforcement. As far as fighting disease, I think it is not good to surrender. If it's hospice and there's somebody on their deathbed and they're fighting, but suffering, then I can see the benefit. But in most cases, when you have somebody that's not supposed to pass away, I think there's great strength in summoning or touching upon your spirit. And in some cases, when people never experience spirit or some form of belonging in the past, then at the last minute, they usually will ask to belong or to join a group. Sometimes you'll see that in the final blessing before death, for someone who just didn't believe. So I think it's important, bottom line, to embrace physicality, as far as exercise and movement, nutrition, as far as anti-inflammatory diet, good sleep, but also spirit. So whether you call it mindfulness and soften the word, or whether you call it spirit, or whether you call it belonging to a church or a synagogue or a temple, I think it's very valuable. I think that for me, it brings back a sense of youth and happiness from way back when. I don't know how I found this, but when my spiritual advisor came to my office, it reminded me of a story. and I looked for it, and it was right there. So coincidence or not, it's up to you. But again, this is the same one I used in high school. This is from my mom. It was she somehow kept it in her belongings when she passed away from pancreatic cancer. I took a lot of her belongings, and I have it again. So and that was from when I was 17. I am now 57. So somehow for 40 years this has been hidden, and now it's out again. So the fact that I just hold this brings a lot of encouragement to me. So during this journey, I'm going through a journey, but check out my videos on my quantum shift. But for the people that are watching this, my patients or clients or just subscribers, don't poo-poo the concept of spirit. I think if you are maximized on everything as far as exercise, nutrition, and sleep, try to add this into your practice and maximize on it, develop it, design it, get some help in finding it, and dive in. If you are an old spiritual practitioner or a Catholic that doesn't go to church anymore, for example, I'd say come back and see what you can garnish out of it. If you just don't believe, that's okay, but watch my videos on mindfulness and nature therapy, because I think there is benefit to that kind of practice too. So if you want to break it down into the black and white before I sign off, there are great things with Japanese force bathing. That's just 30 minutes in the woods, just sitting there in solitude, as I mentioned before, but also without being connected to the speed of the internet, the speed of overbooking. Our schedules are way overbooked. In fact, that's why I think the priority of spirituality is put down, because most people want to see nowadays fast effect from some kind of investment. And praying every day, or at least initiating prayer of any sort, might get you to feel good, but I mean, there's not a huge reward initially compared to watching Netflix or having a chocolate cake. There's immediate feelings, but short-term gain, long-term loss. Because I think this form of healing does have its benefits, but it requires investments, and the benefits will be usually, well, for some of us, experienced immediately, like the way I felt when I just found this again yesterday. Exactly like I felt right at the beginning of competition in high school for states. So if it zoomed me back there, whether this is placebo or not, I felt good, and that feeling of good gave me a wave of serotonin and dopamine. Now I'm ready to start the day. But if you don't have that, I think it's worth it to try to investigate. So regardless of how you get there, if you want to just do the neutral way, then for Japanese force bathing as far as going into nature therapy, or mindful practice as far as 4-7-8 breath, do it. If you are wanting to do more advanced stuff, seek out help. So thanks for watching up until this point. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next video.